Football players are crying for help. Rodri recently said football for him is only about recovery, pleaded that he needs rest, and after playing an entire summer of football with Spain at the Euros, he decided to disappear off of the face of the earth and cut off all communications with the club so he could properly rest. They could not find him, so he missed his return date. This is not normal. Players should not need the movie Castaway to be their vacation inspiration, just to feel human again. And he's not alone in feeling like that either. His City teammates have also come out voicing their frustrations with modern schedules. Kevin De Bruyne said they raised their concerns, but no solutions are found. And Bernardo Silva called their schedules absolutely absurd. Do they have reason to be upset? Are they really being unfairly treated? Or are they soft modern players as some like to paint them? I know the voice in your head to call them whiny millionaires is strong. I see many on Twitter doing so, but I think there are many powers that be that are working against them right now. I agree with the City trio who are loudest on this topic, and I think you should too if you already don't. Let me explain why. There's a growing narrative that football has fallen off, that it's less individually brilliant than before. I made a whole video on this. Please check it out if you're interested. I agree in some ways and disagree to many others, but there is something that I personally feel modern football is much worse in. It's truly off of the rails in one hugely impactful way, and that has to do with the amount of games being played in a calendar year. There's a reason why baseball players are the highest paid players in America. They play the most games. Broadcasters can cram way more commercials and therefore reward their players much more relative to other sports. Football is going through something similar but in a much worse way, because unlike MLB, which is run by a single party, there are many different organizations in football, all of which have their own self-interests. The dark side of the modern game is evident here. If you're a player who plays football in England, for example, the Premier League is responsible for their league matches, the English Football League is responsible for their Carabao Cup matches, the FA is responsible for their FA Cup matches, and if their club is good enough to play in European competitions too, UEFA is responsible for their Conference League, Europa League, and/or Champions League fixtures. Let's then say this player is good enough to play for their country too. UEFA, CONCACAF, CONMEBOL, Confederation of African Football, and the Asian Football Confederation organize their international tournaments depending where in the world they're from. Lastly, for worldwide tournaments like the World Cup, FIFA organized that. Every single organization I just listed all have their own self-interests, and the players are stuck in the middle. Remember my MLB analogy. More games equals more commercials, which equals more money. All the different groups and companies in football are all battling for a bigger piece of the pie at the moment. Football has never been more lucrative. Once you take a step back, you can clearly see a bunch of groups essentially fighting to get more out of it. The only way for organizers who aren't operators of a domestic league to get more money is by making players and countries involved play more games. The Champions League has introduced 2 extra games for every single team involved this year. The next World Cup will host more nations than ever before. And finally, the straw that I think broke the camel's back, the changes made to the 2025 FIFA Club World Cup. FIFA are on the hunt to own another major tournament. What once was a 2-game event for clubs involved has now been expanded to 32 teams. And FIFA have plans to host it every 4 years, exactly like other major tournaments. They're trying to make it more like the World Cup and less like a glorified friendly. This is a huge problem because top players in Europe, North America, and South America will have 3 summers in a row where they've had to be part of a major tournament. Summer 2024 were the Euros and Copa America, 2025 will be the Club World Cup, and 2026 will be the World Cup with their national teams. That leaves players roughly 2 weeks of rest before they have to report for training camp with their clubs again, for 3 summers in a row. Imagine running on average 10.6 kilometers, with many sprints packed in, by the way, not just holding pace, 3 times a week, while also training and traveling too. Then at the end of it all, you only get 2 weeks to recover. In the NBA, say if you're one of the 2 best teams in the entire league by making it to the finals, you still have 4.5 months between seasons. It's clear how ridiculous this is getting in football now, right? FIFA is meant to be the one at the top of the food chain that keeps the best interests of the sport and their players at its core, but instead it's almost completely disregarding player welfare. Again, all so they can get a bigger piece of the pie. How is there any stopping this? It feels like there isn't one, when the biggest football organizer is also adding to the fixture congestion. Who's going to make everyone accountable when the big boss is adding to the problem? There are the club's self-interests as well. After Spurs' last match of the season last year, they flew all the way to Australia to play in a friendly match, 3 days after the season ended. This is mind-blowing. I imagine that trip was commercially appealing for Spurs as they just came off an arguably successful season with their new Australian manager. But they only added to the problem by taking crucial rest away from their squad, especially in a tournament summer. Newcastle went as well, Trippier took part, and then had to report for England duties 5 days later. But if you think that's bad, at least Spurs and Newcastle waited until the season was over. Barcelona in December 2023 flew to Dallas, Texas to play a friendly mid-season. And give me a second, I can't believe I'm about to say this, they played a competitive match the day before. They played on back-to-back days, which is crazy enough on its own in football. But they also had to fly all the way to South Central United States between 2 matches. I'm not making this up. In the middle of the season, they flew across the ocean and still started the likes of Lewandowski, Cancelo, and gave 62 minutes to Yamal. All important players, just so Barcelona could pocket under 5 million euros. Desperate times call for desperate measures, I guess, but who's caught in the middle again? The players. I've given the organizers a lot of grief in this video, but if the clubs who have invested hundreds of millions into their players still pack their schedules at any opportunities they get to, things truly feel hopeless. Can we also quickly talk about international breaks happening after 3 matches into a new season? It drives me mad. Just as I'm getting into the flow of a new season, it all comes to a halt because UEFA and everyone else needs to make players play for their countries to get some of that sweet ticket and TV revenue at the start of the club season too. I love watching important players drop like flies in these pointless glorified friendlies. Yes, I'm being very sarcastic. UEFA tried to at least give these matches a competitive edge by rebranding these friendlies as a biannual competition called the Nations League, with a trophy to win at the end of it and World Cup qualification implications, but to most, like myself, it still feels like a desperate attempt to justify its existence so they can continue to generate revenue. Last year, we finally started to see the effects of all of this. There was a 96% increase in hamstring injuries in the Premier League. That's ridiculous, and hamstring injuries are closely linked to fatigue. Do you guys also remember at the start of last season when several players all tore their knee muscles? I unfortunately feel like this will become more and more common, with schedules only becoming more and more packed. To combat the higher demands of the modern game, teams are relying more on youth because they're better at keeping up compared to old legs. More opportunity for academy players is a good thing until it's overdone. It's led to some getting major injuries and plateauing like Ansu Fati, sustaining long-term injuries like Gavi, or are at high risk of burnout like Lamine Yamal, whom even at his age is already playing every match for his country. With all 3 players, you can clearly see that they're playing too much at too young of an age. This is also adding to the gap between rich and modest teams, as the rich clubs are buying bigger squads to keep up with demands. Smaller clubs who can't afford to have no chance when some big clubs have significantly better B teams than even their starting lineups. Okay, now the elephant in the room for this conversation: player salaries. Some of you may be yelling, "Shut up, you wanker, they're getting paid millions of dollars. They need to do their job and stop complaining." But to that I have to say, yes, thankfully they're being fairly compensated. Organizers are only exploiting their health, not their wallets too. Would you rather these organizations didn't give a fair cut to the people everyone cares to watch? I'd rather the stars of the show get their fair share of the billions football generates than have operators keep the majority. Yes, people have harder jobs and earn significantly less money, but that should be criticism towards what society chooses to reward, and not used as a stick against players complaining about fixture congestion. Look, even selfishly, it's in our best interest to have these players be fit and rested. We want our entertainment to be good, don't we? For me, personally, injuries are my biggest frustration with the sport. It always feels like we're a moment away from another amazing player having their hamstring melt off or knee muscle disintegrate. It's emotionally taxing getting so invested in teams filled with overworked footballers that have no consistency due to injuries. FIFPro, the union for professionals, said this in response to FIFA's Club World Cup: "The extreme mental and physical pressures at the pinnacle of the game is the principal concern of players with multiple club and national team competitions, leading to exhaustion, physical injuries, mental health issues, diminished performance, and risks to career longevity." Do you guys want to see your favorite players play at the top of their game and for a long time? I know I do. Not just tired fragments of themselves who miss giant chunks of the season due to their bodies failing. Here's to hoping something changes sooner rather than later.